When my 5-year-old daughter was fighting for her life in the emergency room, the people I once called family drained my accounts and stole my shares. They laughed, ignoring every warning, but they didn't anticipate that the fury of a mother could burn everything to the ground. I'd been sitting on that hard plastic chair outside the ICU for hours, my eyes fixed on the floor like it might give me an answer. The sharp scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air. The steady beeping of machines behind the closed door counted time in a way that made my chest ache. My daughter, Bella, only 5 years old, lay in there, hooked up to more tubes than I could count on my fingers. I'm Kinsley, 37 years old, a single mother and co-owner of part of the family business. But none of that mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was that Bella was still breathing, still fighting. The past 2 years had blurred into one long nightmare, sleepless nights and whispered prayers. Every dollar I'd saved, every late night I stayed up working, every contract I threw my heart into for clients, it was all for Bella. I got a notification from the bank while sitting quietly by her bedside. I reached for my phone, intending to transfer the next deposit for her treatment. The banking app opened. I blinked once, then twice. My stomach dropped. Checking account, $0. Savings, $0. Company account, also $0. For a second, I told myself it had to be a glitch. I refreshed the app. I checked a different card. Still the same. My hands began to shake. The walls felt like they were closing in. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, so loud I could barely hear the nurse calling someone's name down the hall. I forced myself to call the bank, my voice trembling as I read out my account information. The woman on the other end was calm. Too calm. As if she wasn't about to tell me that my entire life had just been wiped clean. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "I see a series of transactions made overnight. They were authorized from a device registered to your account." "No," I said, my voice cracking. "That's not possible. I understand this is difficult," she interrupted gently. "But the security questions were answered correctly. The transfers were made between 10:40 p.m. and 4 a.m. Her words landed like a punch to the gut. Someone had accessed my account. Someone who knew my information and stole everything. I ended the call without saying goodbye, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. When I left the hospital, the sky was pitch black. The December air in Seattle, Washington, bit into my skin like it wanted to tear through me. I drove like a ghost, my mind swirling in a storm of doubt and fear, until the family company's office building came into view. This place used to be my family's pride, built from the ground up by my father, the place where Clara and I once worked side by side to carry on a legacy, but tonight it looked like a battlefield. Just before pushing open the meeting room door, I caught a glimpse of Jane at the far end of the hallway, arms clutching a stack of documents. Her eyes flicked toward me, then quickly turned away. She was still here, the same quiet employee my father had always trusted, but now she looked like a ghost, too afraid to step into the drama swallowing this place. I wondered if she knew anything, but the sound of laughter from inside the meeting room snapped me back to the present. I pushed the door open. The sound of my heels echoed on the polished tile floor. The laughter stopped. Victor leaned back in the chair at the head of the table, spinning a pen between his fingers like he owned the world. Clara sat beside him. Her eyes glanced at me and then dropped to the table, her body shrinking into her blazer. "Where's the money?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Victor's mouth curled into that mocking smile I'd hated since the first time I met him. "Hi to you, too," he said, voice smooth as oil. I stepped closer, fists clenched. "Don't play with me. My accounts are empty, all of them. Where's my money?" Victor leaned back, took a slow sip from a porcelain cup like he was enjoying the show. We needed it more than you, he said. The company's in trouble. You know that. My ears buzzed, like my brain refused to accept what he'd just said. What? I choked out. Clara finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Don't make this all about you, Kinsley. I laughed, but the sound was dry and hollow. Don't make this about me? $850,000. My daughter is in the ICU, fighting to stay alive, and they emptied my accounts. How is this not about me? I said through clenched teeth. Victor shrugged like the whole conversation bored him. You'll manage. You always do. The rage boiled inside me, threatening to spill, but I held it in. I wouldn't let them see me break. My world was burning, and they sat there in their comfort bubble, sipping coffee like they hadn't just wrecked everything. I took a breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. Then, you won't mind if I take this all the way? They exchanged a glance. Victor laughed, a short, dismissive sound. Clara chuckled too, soft and strained, like I was some joke they'd heard one too many times. Smug, untouchable. But then I saw it. For just a moment, a crack in Victor's perfect composure. I stepped back into the hallway. The weight of the night air pressed against my shoulders. The laughter still echoed in my ears, cold, hollow. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a text from Clara. Don't make a fuss. We're struggling too. I stared at the message. Her words felt like a knife. Don't make a fuss. How could she write that? I closed my eyes, and memory crashed over me like a summer wind. Clara and I, 12 and 10, lying on the backyard grass, fingers intertwined, watching clouds drift by. We'll always be best sisters, right? She whispered, her golden hair glowing in the sun. I nodded, giggling as she drew a pretend house in the sky for us. As long as we have each other, it's enough, she said. Now, those words felt like a broken promise, disappearing under the cold hallway lights. I opened my eyes, reality slamming back. My daughter was in a hospital bed, machines breathing for her. That Clara was gone, replaced by a sister who stood behind Victor and sent texts, like I was the enemy. For a moment, I thought about walking away, leaving them to their performance. But I knew what that meant. They would win. They'd paint me as unstable, the bitter younger sister who couldn't handle failure. I stood there, watching the office lights glow behind the glass, and reminded myself, this isn't about them. This is for Bella. For every hour I worked to make sure we'd be okay. When I left the office, the cold night air clung to me like a second skin. I walked to my car, the sound of my heels hitting the pavement echoing in my head like a slow drumbeat. I drove home in a daze, streetlights sliding past the windshield while my mind kept spinning with Victor's mocking laughter and Clara's averted gaze. When I pulled up to my house, the warm light spilling from the window couldn't comfort me. This house used to be where Clara and I made memories, where my father once sat telling stories on Christmas nights. But tonight, it felt like a stage set for a play I no longer wanted to be in. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped inside. The air had changed. The noise from the confrontation at the office was replaced by the hum of a family dinner. I walked into the dining room, the place where we'd gathered for holidays, and felt like I'd wandered into someone else's life. The table was set for 12, every plate, every glass arranged perfectly, as if everything was normal, as if my world hadn't just fallen apart. The scent of roast meat and herbs filled the room, mingled with expensive wine. Everyone looked relaxed, laughing, swapping idle stories like this was just another evening. But when they saw me, the room shifted. Eyes brushed over me, then quickly turned away, back to their conversations. No one offered me a seat. No one acknowledged I was back. I found my own spot at the end of the table, as far from the laughter as possible, hidden in the shadow of Victor's self-constructed spotlight. He sat at the head of the table, arm casually draped over Clara's chair, basking in the attention like a generous king. I could barely taste the food. My fork scraped against the plate, every movement slow and deliberate, as I tried to focus on anything but the smug grin across the table. My mind drifted to Bella, her pale face, the beeping machines, and then that 0 on my bank screen. I couldn't understand how they could eat so comfortably, knowing what they'd done. Midway through the meal, Victor decided to speak. "You know," he said, raising his wine glass like he was about to deliver some profound truth, "some people just don't know how to manage money." His voice dripped with fake sympathy. "It's sad, really?" A few people chuckled, awkwardly. No one dared to meet my eyes. Clara kept her head down, tapping her finger gently against the stem of her glass. No defense, no apology, just silence. My stomach twisted. I set down my fork. I wanted to scream, to expose every betrayal right there at that damn table. But I didn't. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. I sat there, memorizing every word, every glance. Let them think they'd humiliated me. Let them think I was defeated. As the dinner dragged on, I studied them. The way Victor wielded words like weapons, subtle enough to stay clean, sharp enough to wound. The way Clara leaned on his protection, hiding behind his cruelty like it excused her complicity. And the way everyone else avoided my gaze entirely, choosing the comfort of ignorance over the discomfort of truth. I stayed silent. My silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Every insult, every condescending look, fuel. They had taken my money, my dignity, and tried to strip away my worth. But they couldn't take my will. But they weren't done humiliating me. Not yet. I lingered in the hallway longer than necessary, letting their voices blend with the sound of crickets outside. The laughter from the dining table still echoed in my head, clashing with the image of Bella lying in that hospital bed, machines breathing for her. My hands were freezing, fingers stiff around the phone I hadn't let go of since Clara's message. After a few deep breaths, I forced myself to return to the dining room. And that's when I saw it. My seat had been moved. Earlier, I'd been sitting at the end of the table, but now I'd been pushed all the way back near the kitchen door, where the staff passed by with stacks of dishes, a clear message that I didn't belong among them. Someone had done it on purpose, and they wanted me to notice. I stood there for a moment, taking in the picture-perfect scene. Candlelight flickering softly, glassware glinting under the chandelier, and at the far end of the table, Victor lounged back in his chair, utterly at ease. He didn't even look at me. Every scrape of a fork on porcelain, every muted laugh from the other end of the table felt choreographed. I had never felt so present and invisible at the same time. They didn't need to shout or point. This was a quiet humiliation, carefully designed to remind me of where I stood, outside the family. I sat down at the new seat, the chair creaking softly as I pulled it in. My hand itched to grab my bag and walk out, but I stayed. Maybe out of pride. Maybe because I knew walking away was exactly what they wanted. Then I saw it. A glint of familiar silver under the chandelier's light. Victor raised his hand while talking to someone across the table, and there it was, on his finger. My father's silver ring. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That ring wasn't just jewelry. It belonged to my dad. It symbolized the head of the family, something he wore every day, something he gave to me before he died. I still remembered his voice. "This is yours. Keep it like you'd keep my love." Now it was on Victor's hand. I clenched the napkin in my lap, the fabric twisting in my grip. He tapped the ring against the glass as he laughed with an uncle, like he knew exactly what he was doing, like he wanted me to see it. Through the haze of conversations and clinking glasses, my pulse roared in my ears. I remembered that moment in the hospital, my father's frail hand placing the ring into mine. How could Victor have it now? The dinner passed in a blur. I couldn't taste the food. I barely heard the small talk around me. All I could focus on was the ring and the quiet, crushing ache in my chest. When dessert was served, I stood abruptly, muttering something about needing air. My legs carried me out into the hallway, the noise of the meal fading behind me. I didn't have to wait long. Clara slipped out a few minutes later, her heels clicking softly on the wooden floor. "How does he have Dad's ring?" My voice was low, but sharper than I intended. She froze, but didn't turn to face me. "It's just a ring. I gave it to him to carry on the family legacy," she said quickly, too quickly. "No," I replied, stepping closer. "Don't do that. Dad gave it to me. He said it was mine. So why is your husband wearing it like some kind of trophy?" She glanced back, her face blank. "You always make things difficult," she whispered. "It's just about sharing the family legacy. You need to learn to let go." Let go? My heart pounded in my throat. First the money, now this. "Do you even hear yourself?" She folded her arms, suddenly small, like she was shrinking into Victor's shadow even though he wasn't there. "Please, don't cause a scene tonight. This isn't the place." Her words weren't an explanation. They were a dismissal. A plea for me to stay quiet so everyone else could keep pretending everything was fine. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. I returned to the guest room, the one they stuck me in, farthest corner of the house. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, and I started piecing everything together. A shareholder meeting held without any notice to me. An updated share allocation I was never CC'd on. Renamed accounting files. Tuesday morning meetings quietly renamed family meetings that I was never invited to. One by one, the signs pointed in the same direction. Victor was quietly taking over the company, and I, a co-founder, had been reduced to a problem employee, a troublemaker for requesting an audit, someone lacking understanding of the bigger picture for asking questions about the balance sheet. I was being pushed out. No one said it aloud, but I could feel it. Unanswered messages, deleted meeting invites, eyes that dodged mine when I walked into the office. Close to midnight, the house was silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator somewhere in the distance. I got up, barefoot, stepping quietly into the hallway, careful not to let the wooden floor creak. I'd spent so many holidays here, Christmas mornings in pajamas, summer barbecues with Dad on the porch. But now, those memories felt like they belonged to a different life. I found myself walking toward my father's old study. He always kept his important papers there, and even after he passed, Clara insisted on keeping everything exactly the same. But tonight, something felt off. When I opened the door, the familiar smell of old leather and dust greeted me, but the room looked disturbed. The desk drawers weren't as tidy as I remembered. Folders that should have been neatly aligned were now tilted, some piled haphazardly. I turned on the small desk lamp. The yellow light threw dancing shadows on the wall as I started pulling things out. At first, I was just searching blindly, not even sure what I was looking for. But when my fingers brushed against the edge of a large envelope buried beneath a stack of tax documents, my pulse quickened. My name was written on it, in unmistakable handwriting, Dad's. I opened it, hands trembling. Inside were inheritance documents, an update. At first, I thought I was misreading out of exhaustion. But no, the words were clear. the notarized date staring back at me like an accusation. My father's original will had ensured I had a share in the house and a portion of the family business. He told me that himself. But these papers, they stripped almost everything from me. The main property, liquid assets, even a stake in the company, all quietly shifted into Clara and Victor's names. My throat tightened, and I had to sit before my knees buckled. I read every page, my heart pounding harder with each line. The notarized date was months after Dad's funeral. That didn't make sense. He couldn't have signed those. He was gone. The truth hit like a stone sinking through water. They didn't just steal my savings. They took my legacy. They tampered with the one thing my father left behind to ensure I'd be okay. I wanted to burst out of the room, pound on their door, demand answers. But the house was silent. My chest ached, but my mind was sharper than it had been in days. They took everything, I whispered to myself. So softly the words almost vanished into the heavy silence. But they don't know me as well as they think. I carefully folded the documents and slipped them back into the envelope. As I turned off the desk lamp and stepped into the dark hallway, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about erasure, about them rewriting our family story without me in it, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Morning came wrapped in a heavy gray. I sat in my car, parked outside the hospital. I couldn't even remember how I got there. Just remembered staring blankly at the dashboard, numb. My daughter, Bella, was still inside, fighting to live. Tubes and machines were doing the work her small body couldn't. And I sat here, stripped of everything, my money, my dignity, even my place in the family story. I didn't know how long I'd been sitting there. Long enough for the tears on my face to dry. Long enough for my breathing to slow into the hollow rhythm of defeat. My gaze shifted to the passenger seat. Bella's necklace was lying there, the delicate chain with the star-shaped pendant I'd given her on her 6th birthday, now worn from all the bedtime hugs. I picked it up and pressed it to my chest. In the familiar weight of it, I felt something inside me reignite. If I give up, I whispered to no one, what would I be in her eyes? I couldn't let them win, not like this. And then, a voice broke through, the first flicker of hope in days. It came just when I'd stopped expecting anything good. It was late, the ICU waiting room lit only by cold fluorescent lights, the hum of machines drifting from behind the double doors. I'd been sitting there for hours, my head in my hands, numb from everything. Victor's forged documents, the family's silence, Bella's fragile body fighting behind those closed doors. Time didn't move in that place. It pressed on you, slow and relentless. I couldn't stop thinking about Victor's face, that smug grin, those forged signatures so convincing I'd almost believed I signed them myself. I kept replaying the dining room scene in my head, always coming up with sharper comebacks, ways to make them listen. But every imagined response felt meaningless, because in reality, Victor had walked away with everyone's sympathy, and my life was in his hands. I didn't recognize Jane until she sat right next to me in the ICU waiting room, the pale fluorescent lights casting a worried glow over her face. "Kinsley?" she said softly, her voice hesitant like she wasn't sure I'd want to hear her. I blinked, dazed, trying to pull myself out of the numb fog. Jane, an employee at the family company, had always been the one on the sidelines of every drama, offering polite smiles in meetings and steering clear of trouble. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not now. "I can't stay silent anymore," she said quickly, her eyes darting toward the hallway like she was afraid someone might be watching. "I have to tell you what I know." "What are you talking about?" My voice was hoarse, like my throat had dried out from too many days without speaking. She twisted her hands in her lap, fingers gripping tightly. Victor. He sent an email to his cousin after a late meeting. He thought no one saw, but I accidentally caught it while he was still logged in. My chest tightened, a chill of adrenaline running down my spine. Jane, I said slowly, what are you trying to tell me? She took a deep breath, her eyes lit with quiet resolve. I have a copy of the email he sent. He bragged about stealing your money. My pulse picked up, ears ringing. Bragged about what, exactly? She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. He wrote that he emptied your accounts, that he forged your signature to transfer funds and company shares. He called you easy prey and joked that you'd never figure it out. For a second, the room tilted. I clutched the edge of the chair, grounding myself. Jane pulled out her phone, hands trembling as she unlocked the screen. I have more. Records of illegal transactions he tried to delete from the system. I saved them before I left the company. She handed me the phone. My fingers fumbled as I opened the email file. It was Victor's voice. Arrogant, smug, unmistakable. She's too naive to fight back. Signed everything like a good little target, he wrote, followed by details of the $850,000 transfer and the reassignment of company shares to his name. It was him. Without question. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest, before looking up at Jane. If he finds out, you'll be in danger. Why would you? Her eyes held a mix of compassion and quiet strength. Because I owe your father, and because I'm a mother too. My chest was still tight, but the spark in Jane's voice felt like a small flame flickering in the dark. I clutched the phone tighter, Victor's words replaying in my mind like a declaration of war. He thought I was naive, easy to manipulate. He was wrong. He was just my sister's husband. I was the one my father raised to lead this family. I contacted a lawyer the next morning. Mr. Harris, an old friend of my father's who used to handle contracts for the family business. In his cramped, stuffy office, filled with the smell of old paper and burnt coffee, I laid everything out. The forged documents, Jane's email, the audio recording. Mr. Harris pushed his glasses up his nose, reading each page with a cold, razor-sharp gaze. This is clear fraud, Kinsley, he said, his voice low but firm. But we'll need more. Something indisputable. I knew I had to act. Victor often stayed late at the office, lounging in the boardroom chair like some kind of king. I decided to plant a hidden camera in the company's meeting room, a small device tucked into a gap in the bookshelf where he liked to take private calls after hours. Every step of the setup made my heart pound. I wasn't just fighting for money or inheritance. I was fighting for Bella, for my mother, for myself. The following days at the hospital passed in a haze. I sat beside Bella's bed, holding her tiny hand, the star-shaped necklace she loved tucked in my pocket like a constant reminder. The beeping of the machines matched the rhythm of my heart, each sound pushing me forward. Don't give up. I checked the camera feed on my phone at night, waiting. And then, it happened. One late evening, Victor was in the boardroom, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in that same smug tone. She doesn't stand a chance, he laughed, spinning my mother's silver ring on his finger. I've locked it all down. Her signature, her accounts. They're all mine. This company is mine. I hit record, my hands shaking with fury and relief. This was the proof I needed. Under Mr. Harris's guidance, I began preparing the lawsuit, each document lined up like bullets in a loaded gun. But I wanted my family to see the truth before the law stepped in. I wanted them to see who Victor really was. So I arranged a family meeting at the company office where everything had begun. That afternoon, when I walked into the boardroom, the air was heavy. Polished wood and cold coffee brought back memories of when my father still ran this place. Everyone sat around the table, avoiding my gaze like always. Clara sat next to Victor, her fingers tapping nervously on the tabletop, a flicker of unease in her eyes. Victor, as usual, leaned back in his chair, confident and untouchable. "So, you finally want to talk like an adult," he said when I walked in. His voice was syrupy, but it dripped with contempt. I didn't bite. "Sit," he said. The family gathered around the long boardroom table, some sitting, some standing against the walls. I chose the lone chair directly across from Victor, feeling the weight of every eye on me. But I held my ground. "This isn't easy," I began, my voice calm but steady. "But we need to talk about what's been done to me, to Dad's legacy, and to Bella." Victor scoffed. "This again? You really need to let it go. Everyone hits a rough patch." I said nothing. Instead, I opened my laptop and placed it on the table. The room fell silent. "Before you dismiss me," I said, "just listen to this." I hit play. Victor's voice filled the room, arrogant, cocky, and guilty. "She doesn't stand a chance," he boasted on the recording. "Her signature, her accounts, they're all mine. This company is mine now." Gasps echoed around the room. A few aunts exchanged horrified glances. One uncle cursed under his breath. Clara went pale, her tissue crumpled so tightly in her hand it looked ready to tear. "You," Victor began, but I raised a hand. "I'm not done." Mr. Harris's voice came through the speakerphone, measured, precise. "We've conducted a legal review of the financial records," he said. All unauthorized transactions were traced back to Victor's device and IP address. We also tracked login times to Kinsley's cloud account. Each occurred in the early morning hours when her whereabouts were independently confirmed. I looked Victor straight in the eye. "You said I loaned you that money. Tell everyone why you were logging into my accounts at 3 a.m. Tell them why Dad's will, the one that guaranteed my share in the company, was rewritten in your favor after he died." He shot to his feet, face flushed, words tumbling out faster than his brain could keep up. "You're twisting everything. You're unstable. Everyone knows it." But no one jumped to agree with him. The aunts looked down at their laps. The uncles avoided his eyes. Even Clara's shoulders slumped, like she was finally done defending his lies. "You've taken enough," I said, standing up. "It ends today." It was almost perfectly timed. The boardroom door burst open with a loud bang, and 2 police officers stepped in, firm and focused. "Victor Grayson," the lead officer called, voice hard. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. We have a warrant." The room exploded into chaos. Relatives jumped up. Some screamed, some cried. Victor's arrogance shattered, replaced by panic as he tried to talk over the officer reading him his rights. Clara sobbed, burying her face in her hands. The click of the handcuffs echoed off the walls. For the first time in months, I felt my chest expand, my lungs fill with breath. Victor glared at me as he was led out, his voice shaking. "You think you've won?" But the rest of his threats were drowned out by the slam of the door. Silence settled over the room. Clara finally looked at me, really looked at me, with an expression I hadn't seen in years. Maybe it was gratitude, maybe shame. "I didn't know," she whispered, voice cracking. "He said it was the only way to keep the company from splitting apart. I just wanted to protect the family." I looked at her, the anger still simmering, now tinged with pity. "Family," I said quietly. "You chose him over me, over Bella." She collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face. The rest of the family bowed their heads. No one spoke. "This was never just about money," I said softly. It was about Dad, about Bella, about everyone who let this man take everything because they were too afraid to face him. No one replied. I didn't need them to. I stood there, gripping Bella's necklace in my pocket, and felt like I'd finally taken back what was mine. Not just the money, but justice. In the days after Victor's arrest, the atmosphere at the company shifted. The stifling silence gave way to emergency meetings, endless calls with lawyers, and long nights spent with Mr. Harris, poring over every transaction, every forged signature. Each document we reviewed felt like a puzzle piece bringing me closer to reclaiming my father's legacy. The court moved quickly. The fraudulent transactions were nullified. The $850,000 was returned to my account, and the 40% of company shares Victor had stolen were restored in my name. But the legal victory was only the beginning. On a cold morning, Clara came to the office, standing at the doorway with her hands clasped tightly, like she was afraid I'd turn her away. "Kinsley," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry." She slid an envelope across the desk. Inside were documents transferring 20% of her company shares to me, the portion she had once agreed to let Victor control. "I was wrong to trust him," she whispered, her eyes red. "I thought I was saving the company, saving the family. But I hurt you." I looked at her, the sister who once meant everything to me, now small and fragile. Part of me wanted to hug her, like we used to when we were kids. But the other part, the part that had learned through betrayal, held me back. "I forgive you," I said calmly, "but I need time." "And boundaries." She nodded, tears falling freely, and left without another word. We might heal, but we'd never go back to what we were. With the company now under my control, I began repairing what Victor had broken. I rehired Jane, the former employee who had given me the crucial email, as a financial advisor. I invited back the loyal staff Victor had fired, and together, we rebuilt the company, not as an empire, but as a true legacy, something my father would be proud of. My accounts were stable again, and Bella's hospital bills were paid in full. One afternoon in December, soft sunlight streamed through the office windows as I brought Bella inside. She had recovered, her cheeks rosy, her small hand in mine, the star-shaped necklace sparkling around her neck. "Mom, is this where Grandpa used to work?" she asked, her eyes wide as she looked around the office that once belonged to my father. I smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, sweetheart. And now it's mine. Ours." Bella ran over to the desk and touched the photo frame of my parents. I watched her, a warm sense of hope blooming in my chest. This wasn't just about reclaiming a company or money. It was about reclaiming myself. The mother, the daughter, the woman who refused to let anyone define her worth. Jane, and people like Mr. Harris, these were the family I chose, the ones who stood by me when blood turned its back. As the sunlight hit the desk, catching the silver ring on my finger, I realized something. Family isn't just who you're born with, it's who you choose to keep close. People like Victor can take your money, your shares, even your precious memories, but they can't take your will, not unless you let them. I chose to fight, not just for Bella, but for me, for the legacy my parents left behind. As I left the office that day, hand in hand with Bella, I felt lighter, as if for the first time in months, I could finally breathe. I hope you, too, find the strength to set your boundaries, to protect what matters to you, and to tell your story. Because in the end, your story deserves to be heard.